Today we're going to be picking up where we left off last week. Obviously, we're in a series about being engaged. It's a series on choices for ourselves and our own personal faith, and also how we're engaging with others, whether they're our brothers and sisters in Christ or those who are lost. And then how we get engaged with our church family. And last week the focus was on a spiritual discipline called silence and solitude. We looked at how vitally important this practice was to Jesus. There were all these examples in the Gospels of Jesus going away into the wilderness, the eremos, the quiet, lonely places. And we kind of basically made the point that silence and solitude, that was a part of how he got his power, how he got his clarity of mind to make the decisions that he made. And in doing so, ended up living a perfect life. And I feel today more than ever, we as his followers need to rediscover this practice of silence and solitude. 100 years ago, this probably wouldn't quite a big a deal, or it's hard. It's less noise in the world, less things to draw our attention. But now, in the modern society, this is a lost spiritual discipline to unhurry our lives. I'm going to be honest, I was very tempted to just say that and then sit down for 5 minutes and let you sit in the silence and solitude. In fact, some brothers encouraged me to do that, but I thought, I'm going to trust that if you want it, you're going to do it. If you want it, if you want to be a follower and imitator of Jesus, you're going to do it. You're going to do it. Most of the great teachers and spiritual leaders of their time all agreed that silence and solitude is one of the most, if not the most important of all the spiritual disciplines. There's a quote that says, "Without solitude, it is virtually impossible to live a spiritual life. We do not take the spiritual life seriously if we do not set some time aside to be alone with God and listen to him." It's blunt, but so is this. Be still. Be still and know that I am God. How do we know God? There's a lack of nuance there. There's no exceptions to this rule. There's no self-deprecating story to soften the blow. Just straightforward honesty. If you don't set time alone to be with God, your relationship will wither on the vine. And I do want to remember, this is solitude, not isolation. Isolation is an empty, lonely feeling, right? Solitude is an intentional focus and setting where we're silencing that outer noise and that inner noise so we can hear God's voice. And again, this all makes relationships make sense because your relationships with God is no different than your relationships with others, right? It takes time alone to make a relationship happen. I mean, in my relationship with Tamara, in our marriage, if we didn't have the time alone to share our problems and our heartaches, but also our dreams, if we didn't have time alone to just be shoulder to shoulder, what happens to our marriage? Obviously, it'll suffer, if not eventually die. The same is true of your relationship with God and even to your own soul. There's a saying in old parent literature that's called that, to a child, love is spelled T-I-M-E. It's not just for parents and children. If you love God the Father and want a thriving, full relationship with him where you experience his presence throughout the days, then you need to carve out time to be alone with him, full stop. Full stop. It's so much more straightforward than we think it is. Just take an hour a day to enjoy God. Now, before you write me off and go back to your very busy, very noisy, very loud lives, I would again add, these are some of the words of the wisest spiritual leaders that have ever lived. People like St. Augustine, Mother Teresa. And if that is something you're like, nope, not them. How about Jesus? Hopefully all of their words carry a lot more weight than mine do, because if we don't practice silence and solitude, we're going to reap the consequences of this. We will feel distant from God and end up living off someone else's spirituality, more likely than not, whether that's a podcast or a book or a one-page devotional. as we rush out the door, or maybe just hopefully the praise period is going to sing the songs that really gets me fired up Sunday so I can just ride this high until I come back on Sunday. We don't have to live like this. Living like that will end up making us feel distant from ourselves. We'll lose sight of our identities and callings. We get sucked into that tyranny of urgency and lose the important stuff. We feel overwhelmed, stress and anxiety hit us over and over, and I'm not sure that it ever goes away when we're in those places. That sense that you're always behind, you just can't ever catch up or just never done. Exhausted before things even get started. I mean, you wake up and you're like, man, really? Is my alarm clock working? It feels like I would much rather go back to bed. I'm already ready for bed for today. And then we start to turn to whatever escape we choose. You run out of energy to do the actual life-giving things our souls need. And so often, we end up choosing the cheap fix. For some, that's a glass of wine. For some, that's streaming a TV show. Just diving into the world of sports. I'm very excited that the Lakers got Luka Doncic. It's a big deal to me. But I can't sacrifice my time with God because I'm excited about that. Social media, there's all these things, but that just makes us become easy prey for the tempter, just furthering our sense of distance from God into our souls. We lose any real depth. We start going from surface to surface to surface and never the core. We become reactionary, right? Where the smallest things start to trigger us. A throwaway line, a snide comment, a suggestion, it doesn't take much. We lose our tempers, we lose our patience. We bark at the kids, we snap at our spouses, we blow off our friends, and we get defensive, we sulk, we get angry or sad, probably both. Those are the signs and the symptoms of a life without silence and solitude. And on the flip side, here's the alternative. We end up finding our quiet place. Somewhere in a park, a little nook in your house where you like to read. It could even just be waking up before the kids and everyone else in your house wakes up, or going to bed, or after they do. Wherever it is for you to find that quiet time, and it doesn't even have to be a full hour, but at least long enough to decompress from all the noise and traffic and stress and nonstop stimulation the modern society throws at us. Everyone is fighting for your attention. Everyone and everything is fighting for your attention. It's time to stand up for your own soul's sake. We need to start slowing down so we can breathe and be present in the moment in the same way that Jesus constantly was. And for some people at first, this can be a lot. A whole gauntlet of human emotions, not just that joy and gratitude and peace and restfulness, but also sadness and doubt and anger and anxiety. I mean, usually I feel, when I do this, all the lousy emotions first when I'm sitting there. That's what hits me first. Oh, I didn't do that right. I'm stressed about this, and of course this is not working now. I'm going to go through all those first. Let me tell you. That's what's going to happen. But we face the bad and the ugly so we can then get to the good. Our worry, our depression turns into our hope and desire for God. Our sense of God's absence turns into our sense of his awareness. All the lies that we end up telling ourselves turn into the truth that we come to know. Things like your motivations, your addictions, your coping mechanisms that we reach through just to make it through the week all get exposed, and sometimes painfully so. It's just there. But rather than leaking those emotions out on people that we love and care about, we instead express them in a place that's safe, filled with the Father's love. I mean, can't you just hear Jesus saying, "Come to me, all of you who are weary, and I will give you rest"? But in reality, how many people, when they're tired, say, "I'm going to Jesus"? Jesus, the great physician, says, hey, when you're experiencing this and this, when you're weary and you're burdened, and you need this. But when's the last time you heard someone say, man, I'm so tired, it's a long week, I need to go to Jesus? What are we doing? We got to slow down, because that will be our place of freedom. The truth shall set us free. Our failures slowly lose their power on us, as do our successes. We get out from under people's opinions of us, their approval, their disapproval, because that's not where our identity is based. Our identity is based in Christ Jesus. We're free to be us, the mixed bag that we are, nothing more than children with our Father adopted in love. That's what Jesus meant when he said, abide in me. An abode, a home, a place of rest. Our rest is in Jesus. In silence and solitude, our souls can finally be at home. So we kind of really have like two options here. Option A, we neglect this practice. We make excuses. We get sucked into the rat race and face emotional unhealth at best, or spiritual oblivion at worst. Or B, we finally figure out how to do the silence and solitude. Like, that's really kind of it. I mean, even the rest of the world is starting to catch on to the idea that slowing down, being more present, is good for the mind. They call it mindfulness. Mindfulness is simply a buzzword for silence and solitude from the secular world. That's what that is. It's the same thing. It's just missing the best part. Jesus. The way the story is told is that mindfulness is a derivative of Buddhism, updated by psychotherapeutic techniques. All right. But I would argue there's a case that is much more Jesus than Buddha, much more Sermon on the Mount than anything else that our world can teach us. Followers of Jesus have been doing this for thousands of years. Sometimes they just call it prayer and meditation, but 2 millennia of this tradition to draw on. And I know people are going to say, well, David, that's easier said than done. This practice is hard to do. I would say, yeah. I find this really hard to do. This is a hard spiritual discipline for me. It's hard to say, okay, I've got all these things going on. I'm really busy. I'm stressed. I'm just going to sit and be quiet now. Like, I can hear in my own head the words, David, you're being neglectful. What are you doing? You're wasting time. You're wasting time. That's how my mind would probably sometimes thinks about this practice of sitting and being quiet. I'm just wasting time. What am I doing? I got things to do. I got a book to read. I got a podcast I got to listen to that's about the spirituality of things. I don't. My mind will say, David, you got to get out there. You got to serve and love and serve and love and serve and love until you crash. That's what God wants. That's what he wants you to do. Don't think about yourself and dwell with him. And when you sound it out like that, when you think it out and rationalize it out, you come to the point of, wait, well, that's what's actually crazy, is burning and crashing, instead of practicing some silence and solitude to refresh and renew my soul. I mean, is this not the story of Mary and Martha? Luke 10, starting in verse 38. As Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. She had a sister called Mary, who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. She came to him and asked, Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself? Tell her to help me. Martha, Martha, Martha. The Lord answered, you are worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed, or indeed only one. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her. I think we live in a world of Marthas now. I think it's very easy to be Martha. I got this going on. I don't got time to go sit at Jesus' feet. Ain't nobody got time for that. I mean, this little short 5 verses, I mean, that's the entirety of what we've been talking about now for a while. This is it. She's chosen better. Am I choosing better? Personally, I'm learning that this practice of quiet time is becoming a better part of my day. It is helping me make the harder, the tougher decisions. Even with Tamara and I, as we are united front in parenting our children, it feels like there's a third person there being like, yeah, you guys got this. You guys got this. And I got to tell you, it feels great. But there's another practice. And it's always been there from the beginning. But for some reason, we really have gotten away from it. And it's the same mindset and vein of getting rid of hurry and eliminating busyness. It's the same umbrella, if you will. Because ultimately, nothing in this life apart from God can really satisfy our desires. Our need for rest, our need for the things that only He can provide. And when we get away from those types of spiritual disciplines, we end up in that state of chronic restlessness, or worse, anger, anxiety, disillusionment, depression, all of which will lead us to a life of hurry, a life of busyness. So again, we ask the question, is there something from the practices, the teachings of Jesus that can help us with this problem? To help mitigate against the chronic restlessness of our souls and tap into what Jesus' rest is for us, that rest that He said He provides? The answer is yes. We saw how silence and solitude help, but there's another one that's kind of gotten away from us. We don't really talk about it, and that's the Sabbath. We don't really talk about the Sabbath anymore because Jesus did away. And I will preface this, that I understand that Jesus is our Sabbath. I get that. But let's take a look at the idea of Sabbath, what God had instituted real quick. The Sabbath word comes to us from the Hebrew word Shabbat. If you've watched The Chosen, you have heard that word, Shabbat. The word simply means to stop. Simply stop. It's a day to stop. Stop working, stop wanting, stop worrying. Just stop. So for a second, I want you to picture any sort of ad you've seen. Any commercial on TV, any ad you've seen. It could be a bunch of people at a party and they're selling you Doritos. It could be a couple in a very comfy bed, just snuggled up. It's an ad for a bedspread. It's this picture of a couple on a hill. The guy's got his arms behind his back and the girl's got her head on his shoulder. You guys can all picture this stuff. It's the person holding a cup of coffee or tea, looking out the window at rain. Do you know what all of those images are of? They're of Sabbath. They're all images of people stopping and enjoying life. That's the reality. I mean, if we go to the start of the Bible, right at the very beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. But after 6 days of hard work to get the universe up and running, check this out, Genesis 2. By the seventh day, God had finished the work He had been doing. So on the seventh day, He rested from all His work. Then God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it He rested from all the work of creating that He had done. You guys catch that? God rested. You can hear it. David, I'm very busy. I have so much going on, so many things to do, and it's just like, but did you hear it? God rested. David, I have a great job. I even love. It's wonderful. But did you hear it? God rested. We have kids. They're putting all the stuff on Sundays and Saturday. There's just all these birthday parties and sports events. But did you hear it, right? You guys heard it, right? God rested. And in doing so, He built a rhythm into the DNA of creation, a tempo. God worked for 6. He rested for 1. And when we fight this 6-day work, 1-day Sabbath rhythm, honestly, we're going against the grain of the universe, of what God created. It's a philosopher named H.H. Farmer, maybe relation to Terry? No? Maybe. And he said, if you go against the grain of the universe, you get splinters. When I brought up the idea of bringing back the Sabbath, I've had the whole spectrum. I've had people say, we do a Sabbath already. We're doing that. We've seen the importance of that. And I've had other people be like, well, that's a religious Pharisaical thing. I don't need to do that. I heard this, that, well, David, the devil never takes a day off. The devil never takes a day off. Well, we're talking about the devil, right? Didn't he lose? Also, it's the devil. What are we talking about? You know, the last time society tried to ditch the 7-day work week was during the French Revolution. They switched to a 10-day work week, right? To up productivity, the rise of the proletariat. Can you hear that all stuff? And what ends up happening? It's complete disaster. Their economy bottomed out, suicides skyrocketed, and here's the ultimate ironic thing about that. Productivity went down. It's been proven study after study. There is zero correlation between hurry and productivity. In fact, once you work a certain number of hours in the week, your productivity will plummet. The law of diminishing returns. Do you want to know what that number is, according to most studies? It's about 50 hours. Like a 6-day work week. Weird. One study said that there was zero difference in productivity between workers who logged 70 hours and those who logged 50 hours. Could it be God is speaking to us even through our bodies? My point is this: the rhythm isn't a byproduct of human ingenuity, some ancient version of the 7 habits of highly effective people. We're free to adopt it and change it as we see fit for the modern era. No, it's the way a brilliant, perfect mind in God created and designed our souls and societies to flourish and thrive. We're fighting God. We're going against our own souls. So what does the writer in Genesis mean by God rested? Was God tired? Did God burn out by making all the creation? No, the Hebrew word means to stop, but it can also mean and be translated to delight. Has a dual idea of stopping and also delighting in our lives, in his world. The Sabbath is an entire day set aside to follow God's example of delight and stopping in the world and our lives, and above all in God himself. Imagine most of us are going to be probably pretty new to this idea of Sabbathing, right? So let's ask a question. We'll give shape to Sabbath. What could I do? What could we do for 24 hours that would fill our soul with joy? It's just deep joy that would make us spontaneously combust with wonder and awe and gratitude and praise. Because really, that's what the Sabbath is. It's an invitation to enter the light. The Sabbath, when experienced as God intended, is the best day of our lives. Without question, without thought. It's the best day of the week. Sabbath is a holy time where we get to feast and play and dance and love on our spouses and sing and pray and paint if you're into that and walk and spend time with our friends. To be a part of creation in its fullness. Few people are willing to enter into a Sabbath like that and delight in it and to sanctify it and to make it a holy day. All this is rooted in God. He rested, he stopped, he set aside time, an entire day just to delight in his world. But notice what else he did. He blessed the seventh day and made it holy. Isn't that strange? Do you ever think about that God blessed a day? He blessed it. What does that mean? Right? A few things to note here. There are 3 things that God blessed. He blessed the animal kingdom. And he said, be fruitful, go, and multiply. Cool. He blessed humans. Be fruitful, go, and multiply. And then he blessed the Sabbath, a day. What does that mean? It means that the Sabbath, just like an animal or a human, has the life-giving capacity to procreate, to fill up the world with more life. Life is tiring. Case in point, when I say that, life is tiring, some shoulders let down, some heads nod. Some people start thinking about all the things they have to do or the things that have made them tired. Life is tiring. Get to the end of the week, even if you love your job, you're still worn down on some level emotionally and even spiritually. The Sabbath is how we fill our souls back up with life. It's another really interesting survey. I love surveys because they reveal the truth about things. You know, you can lie about the numbers, but the numbers don't lie type of thing. So for me, these surveys are really interesting. There was one done, and this person was looking for the happiest people on earth. And the whole premise is that he's trying to find the happiest people on earth. And you want to know who's at the very near top of that list? It's a group of Christians called Seventh-day Adventists. And these Christians are really serious about the Sabbath. They're very serious about the Sabbath. This doctor noted that they lived 10 years longer than the average American. 10 years. If you do the math, if you Sabbath once every 7 days, do you know what that adds up to in a lifetime? Almost 10 years exactly. Almost 10 years exactly. There was another study done on blue zones. Blue zones is a whole documentary about it. And essentially what this study was, why are these people in these certain communities and cultures living so long? Guess who else is in that community? 7-day Adventist. Yep. So when I say the Sabbath is life-giving, that's not empty rhetoric. If the studies are to be believed, every day you Sabbath, you statistically and scientifically are likely to get back an elongated life. Makes you start to wonder and go, maybe I should Sabbath 2, 3, 4 times a week, maybe. Why not? But not only are you going to live longer, more importantly, you're going to live better. So first, the Sabbath is blessed. Second, is holy. Have you ever thought about that? How could a day be holy? To a non-Christian, especially in the ancient times, that would have been out there to think about, really. Because when you think about things that are holy, you think about temples, shrines, a mountaintop, whatever, the Bible. Not a day, not a time. For a lot of religions, if you want to meet God, you got to make a pilgrimage. You got to go to Mecca, to Stonehenge, whatever. But God is saying, no, you just have to stop and set aside a day of the week to Shabbat, to Sabbath, to just experience the joy. So there's a day that is blessed and is holy. There's a rhythm creation, 6 in 1. When we tap into this rhythm, we're going to experience health and life. Maybe you're like, David, what does this have to do with making disciples? That's our vision, right? We're out here making disciples. What does any of this have to do with making disciples? Imagine this. If you go to the doctor, and when you're sitting there waiting, you hear and the doctor opens the door, and they're like, ugh. All right, what's your deal? What's going on? What's wrong with you? How much confidence is that going to inspire in your ability to treat you? Probably not much. We go up to people and like, hey, I know the answer to love and peace and rest and joy and hope. And they're looking at us and going, boy, you're so busy and running around. And I saw you yell at somebody in the checkout line the other day. How much confidence is that going to inspire that we're following the path of Jesus, the model of Jesus? I know some people are going to say, well, not everyone's going to think like that. And I'm going to say this. I think we're wrong. I think we're wrong about this. I think people notice more than we give them credit for. Their ability to perceive what our lives are like behind the scenes is probably a lot better than we give anyone credit for. People can tell when we're having bad days, good, whatever. And I just feel like we're undercutting this message of peace and joy and hope and love by living these overly hurried, busy lives. I gave you guys the example of trying to get the kids and everyone in the family out the door when we're in a hurry. Let's go, let's get in the car, let's go. Is that joyful, peaceful, loving? You can't experience that stuff hurried. It's a perspective that people will see, and it just doesn't jive with one that's living and following these spiritual disciplines. Again, this was good enough for God. This was good enough to God to stop and find the joy. And here we are saying, I only need 3 hours of that on a Sunday morning, 4 hours. The hubris, right? The arrogance. God needed 24, I only need a few. I'm good. We're going to talk more about this next week, the idea of Sabbath and historically what it looked like. I don't ever want my sermons to feel like I'm doing this. I'm telling you guys this idea of eliminating hurry, making the choice to be present, to seek God, to experience Him. It's hit me like a ton of rocks. I mean, it's all things we know, we've heard. But when you're faced with the reality of what studies show, what people are saying, when you get the scripture and it's put right in front of your face, be still and know that I'm God. Well, I want to know God. I just not very good at being still. It's hard. This is a lot for me. I'm probably the person in this room who needs to hear this more than anybody. But my prayer always as I'm preparing these sermons is that God will give me the words that everyone needs to hear, that it'll have an impact and a change on your lives too, just like it has in mine. The series is hard. Getting engaged is not easy. I'm not going to lie to you. It takes a focus, it takes an intentionality, but the reward is so worth it. Speaking of rewards, if you haven't been baptized, there's never any better day than today. I mean, can you imagine tomorrow going into work or school, wherever? What'd you do? What'd you do at the Super Bowl? Well, I went to this guy's Bob's house. He had a pool. I got baptized, and then I had hung out at the Super Bowl party. What a great baptism story. God, Super Bowl. No offense to anybody in here. Even lower. If anyone in here is struggling to find that peace and that joy and that love, and slowing down just doesn't seem possible, let us know. We'd love nothing more than to love on you, to sit still with you, and share how much we do care about you and how much God cares about you. If anyone has any needs, come, let it be known as we stand and sing.